What if you had made your decision early in life to live the warrior lifestyle to its fullest? What if the timing of your career brought you through every major conflict within the last 40 years? What if you achieved a rank as the highest position an enlisted soldier could ever achieve, being the third person to ever do so? What would you do after that? Would you hang up your boots? Or would you continue to answer the calling of leadership to other warriors coming up in the ranks and serve as a subject matter expert on military matters? Join me as I talk with the 3rd Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, John Wayne Troxell, as we talk about his journey in service and what he is doing to help bolster the current generation of warfighters today. This is Veteran Success Story. Welcome to another episode of Veteran Success Story. In today's episode, I had the opportunity to sit down with SEAC John Wayne Troxell. So just as a disclaimer, this episode was actually recorded a few months ago, but there was some problems with the audio and everything else, and I honestly did not have the heart to tell SEAC Troxell about it and was kind of going over what I was going to do about it. Thankfully, since then, I've learned a few techniques that was able to bring the audio back. However, I will say that my interview style in here is pretty amateur, even though right now still is, but bear with it. The guy, honestly, man, a legend out there. SEAC Troxell, I mean, it's basically, he's someone who went to the very pinnacle of where you could go within the enlisted ranks within the military. And it was incredible to be able to sit down and have the opportunity to talk with him about his career and some of the other things that, he views as the warrior lifestyle and where his specific blend of that lifestyle, went. He's a hard charger, that's for sure. And he's one of the guys that his place within the Hall of Fame, for the 82nd Airborne is something well-deserved. So heck of a dynamic guy. And if you don't know anything about him yet, which I'd be surprised if you didn't, but just look up eTool Nation and some of the other projects that he has going on. But you can just Google him, honestly. But I'll put everything in the description links for the episode. But without any further talk, let's get into the episode. Welcome to another Veteran Success Story. Today, I'm joined with SEAC John Troxell, which, I didn't really understand what SEAC was exactly, because I was like, does that make him a retired command sergeant major? Or, because you were, number 3 in line, right?
Yeah, I was number 3.
Okay, so I was always confused. I'm like, how do I address him? But now I understand SEAC is a rank, and it's basically as far as you can go on the enlisted side. It is the pinnacle. If you want to explain that a little bit to people.
As a matter of fact, you can see my rank on my ID card is SEAC. So yeah.
And it's weird when you've never seen something like that before.
Yeah. So, like anything that happens in the military when there's change or evolution. And so for years and years and years, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was the senior officer in the DOD, and the Secretary of Defense never had any enlisted advisor. Obviously, yep. They got enlisted aides and things like that. And it was General Pete Pace, Marine, when he was the chairman around 2005. Well, first of all, it was Air Force General Richard Myers, who was the chairman, who was thinking about this, that there needs to be a senior enlisted advisor to the chairman. But it never came to fruition until 2005, when General Pace, he kind of had an epiphany. Everywhere he would travel to visit troops and he would get off his aircraft, he would get to the bottom of the stairs, there would be a commanding officer and a senior enlisted leader advisor standing there. And he realized in a hurry that everybody, to include the service chiefs, had a senior enlisted advisor except him. across the Department of Defense, he was the only guy that didn't have that. And so he changed that, and he hired Army Command Sergeant Major Joe Gainey. So Gainey was the first guy. Gainey was, had to feel things out. They had to figure things out. And again, with the Pentagon and the Joint Staff and being the senior enlisted guy in all of DOD, it's going to take a while for people to get accustomed and understand what the position was. Well, then when he left and when he retired in 2008, Admiral Mullen, Navy, was the chairman, and he chose not to fill the position. Now, he said, I don't need a senior enlisted advisor. I'll go straight to the service senior enlisted. And so for 3 years, the position was vacant. Now, ironically, Ken Preston was the Sergeant Major of the Army at that time.
Yep.
And I asked Ken, over the course of that 3 years, how many conversations he had with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He said 0. So what I think it was Navy culture. They're officer heavy, and they rely on, they have the officers mess, the chiefs mess, and the lower enlisted mess. And I think Mullen wasn't comfortable having a senior enlisted advisor. Well, then General Dempsey comes in, and Dempsey says, an Army general says, I couldn't think of doing this job without having a senior enlisted advisor. So he hired Marine Sergeant Major Brian Battaglia. Battaglia had the job for 4 years. I was hired by Marine General Joe Dunford. I worked for Dunford for 43 months, and my last 5 months was with Army General Mark Milley. And then CZ Colon Lopez, Air Force, replaced me, and now it's a Marine Troy Black. But through this time, so Gainey and Battaglia got it set up that, the SEAC crest was developed, and the SEAC flag was developed, and the charter and everything. Well, when I was there, the number one thing I wanted to do, not so much for me, but for those behind me, was every service senior enlisted leader had a distinctive rank insignia, except for the SEAC. And the SEAC is the senior most enlisted person in the DOD.
Yeah.
So for 3 years, I got pushback from heraldry, from the Navy especially, didn't want to support this. And the Marine Corps didn't want to support it. And the Air Force and Army were like, okay, we'll figure it out. Well, anyways, I finally got across the finish line 10 days before I left the position. And so when General Milley pinned the SEAC distinctive rank insignia on me, he said, hey, look, you're not going to wear this very long, but at least you can be buried in it. So we got the rank done, and then CZ Colon Lopez, the guy after me, the Air Force, he got it that the SEAC rank was in the DEER system, the Defense Eligibility Enrollment Reporting System. Therefore, myself and all former SEACs and the current SEAC, our titles of address are SEAC, and that's what our rank is. And we are, in our DEER's enrollment, we are the SEAC now. So it is a continued evolution of the position and an acceptance of the greater DOD, but an evolution of the position, the rank, and everything. And now I will tell you what this has spawned is, the chief of the National Guard Bureau, the senior National Guard 4-star in the entire National Guard, is a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His senior enlisted advisor, either an Air Guardsman or an Army Guardsman, was wearing traditional Chief Master Sergeant or Command Sergeant Major rank. Well, about a year ago, they got a distinctive rank insignia for that SEA of the NGB. And so John Raines' Army is the SEA of the NGB, and he will wear that distinctive rank insignia. So now, all senior enlisted advisors on the joint that advise the Joint Chiefs of Staff now have distinctive rank insignia. And so I think that's important in the evolution of senior enlisted positions, most importantly with the SEAC position, that it has that. Because there was a while there with Battaglia and myself where people were like, do we really need this position, And
it would only make sense on how the structure, especially in the U.S. military, the NCOs are the backbone.
yeah,
It blows my mind.
So, going back to when Mullen said, hey, I'll just go to the service senior enlisted, and he never once had a meeting with any of them. The continuity between the service senior enlisted leader and their relationship with the chairman and the Secretary of Defense is through the office of the SEAC.
Yep.
Otherwise, those guys would never have a meeting or an engagement or whatever with the chairman and the Secretary of Defense, and arguably the president as well, and the National Security Council. And that was one of the things I focused on, is making sure not just those service senior enlisted, but the combatant command senior enlisted who worked for four-star generals that reported to the Secretary of Defense, that collectively we had that audience regularly. And that, more importantly, the chairman, the SecDef, and the administration had that audience with this robust, dare I say, august group of senior enlisted leaders.
As it goes up, I mean, it's a little different. Things become more bureaucratic and everything, but
100%.
Yeah. And and I've heard it. I've heard it to people who have been to the academy and whatnot, and then they go forward and they're like, whoa, this is just a complete different position than before, a stark contrast. But by that point, they're masters, within of that trade. So, I mean, going forward, it makes sense to have that person there, but it's a little bit of a different job for them, in it and whatnot, and to acclimate to that. Like because you were, when was that where the SEAC position was taken on? Because you have 37 years under your belt, right? In the service?
1 month shy of 38, I served. So 2008 to 2011. So Gainey was the first SEAC from 05 to 08. 08 to 11, the position was vacant. And Battaglia had it 11 to 15. I was 15 to 19. Colon Lopez 19 to 23. And now Troy Black has had the job for a year and some change.
You were in there in kind of that period so I left active duty in 15, and I know I was starting to get frustrated. I know part of my side in active duty was I had joined up during a time of war. So this is 2008. I'm leaving in 15 to go over to the reserve side. But just, it seemed like a lot of the war fighters and stuff were leaving. It was that exodus and stuff. A lot of them we were all getting frustrated at some of the paperwork or the different bureaucratic. It was almost like there was a lot of bureaucratic and political type things being pushed down into the service at that point, to where a lot of either the war fighters didn't understand, or it was frustrating for us because we're like, hey, I'm just a year between that next deployment, and we've acclimated to that crazy op tempo at the time. And then it's, wait a minute, mandatory trainings and death by PowerPoint. And like, when are we going to start doing our job? So it got frustrating.
It's a bit ironic, we try to focus, campaign plans and strategy and, our policies at the strategic level to keep us out of combat.
Yeah.
And how do we get after integrated deterrence and everything? But at the tactical level, the warrior gets addicted to combat because of the predictability. And dare I say, and this, that you feel so much safer in the most dangerous place in the world with 100 pounds of kit on, ammunition strapped on you with your weapons, and you're surrounded by a platoon of like-minded killers like yourself. And that is your, dare I say, safe space, and the American public can't understand it. And I say this all the time with what I do with veterans. You can take the warfighter out of combat, but you will never remove the combat experiences from that warfighter. Yeah. And so when I see things, when I was the SEAC, and when I got up there the first year, and we had this online training stuff where you had to sit behind a computer and you had to click, half a dozen times or a dozen times to finish some online class that was a bunch of bullshit and had nothing to do with lethality, readiness or anything like that, or winning wars. And so when Secretary Mattis came in as the Secretary of Defense, and his number one focus was, we are going to posture ourselves and position our military that if any nation state or non-state actor comes at us, we are not just going to defeat them, we're going to annihilate them. And he said, we are going to get rid of, and this was in 2017, we're going to get rid of this BS online training. We're going to get back to realistic training where the troops are in the field, they're doing their job and things like that. And my concern was when Secretary Mattis left, all of a sudden that stopped losing steam. And, from, the last administration, I think it went, sideways a little bit in terms of what we were trying to do to get after. We were more focused on how people felt and how we were getting after leveraging diversity and equity, and being inclusive. And don't get me wrong, I'm all about inclusion, but, equity means everybody's going to land in the same place. And unfortunately, in a meritocracy and like the military, not everybody is going to be the SEAC. Not everybody is going to be the Sergeant Major of the Army. Not everybody is going to be an infantry platoon sergeant,
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of went sideways. And then when we got after the People First initiative, it briefed well at the strategic level, but when it made its way through the operational level to the tactical level, in some cases it went from people first to me first. And all of a sudden you had people that had this sense of entitlement that because they were wearing the uniform, they deserved everything, and they deserved accolades, and they deserved the free meals from the American public and everything. And if they didn't get that, then there's something wrong with the American public. So that term selfless service that you and I live by deploying back to combat and loving every minute of it, because that's when we were our most happiest as a warrior, was when we were on the front line fighting. And all of a sudden, selfless service started getting transitioned to what's in it for me. And, thankfully, I think we're going in a direction now that we're going to get back to those core values, the Army values. We talk about those, selfless service being a key one. We're getting back to focusing on, and I was just in the Pentagon last week, and I met with Troy Black, the current SEAC, met with other senior leaders. And the prevailing theme was, if this doesn't equate to better lethality, better readiness, better fitness, and most importantly, winning wars, then we're not even going to mess around with this shit. We are just going to focus on what's important. And so some of the things that we were doing across the DOD, they're going to go by the wayside. Some of those programs that we were wasting money on that had nothing to do with lethality and readiness, they're going to go bye-bye. And we're going to find more efficient ways to use that money to best prepare the warfighter to fight and win on any given day, anywhere in the world.
I agree with you on some of there was a whole lot of just muck out there, and they're trying to find that next way forward. They were trying to put people first, making that individual soldier, important. But yes, there is a sense of entitlement from some. There's always one, right? There's always one. But I know some of the stuff that happened when I was in 2000 and I think it was 2012 when the Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed.
Yeah.
And I had served in Afghanistan in combat with somebody in 2010 who was pretty openly gay. Nobody cared.
Yeah,
but it was for someone like him and whatnot, it was important to him that he had the ability to do that. That guy passed any standard that was thrown at him. And honestly, I think that it shouldn't be whether whether it be male, female, gender, it should be by merit. It should be by the standards. If they can pass the standards, I went on both sides of it. I served with women in a soft capacity at one point. Yeah. Some of them would put some of the guys I served with to shame with what they did with some of the units and stuff, that they were like, hey, we go by the Ranger standards for that stuff. Yes, females have to pass that end too. Yeah. And they push out. And I was just like, man, like I know guys that weren't that motivated and stuff to do that. So, for some of it, it's unfortunate that I think the pendulum is going to swing the other way to where we are going to lose some good people in the service that have their heart in the right place. But I also understand it, when you go for a certain period of time, and people are taking advantage of a system, you might have to just do, hey, back to the drawing board, go to the chopping block.
Yeah. And here's the bottom line. And you said it, I have plenty of gay friends, I have, gay relatives in my family. My wife has gay relatives in my family. We could give a shit less about that. Okay. Yeah. And because I don't go around celebrating it, doesn't mean that I'm anti-gay. Okay.
Exactly.
I don't give two shits about what happens behind closed doors with consenting adults.
Yeah.
All right. I got bigger shit and bigger fish to fry, and I don't worry about that. So if I don't celebrate two men or two women being married to each other, doesn't mean I have something against it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So you're homosexual. Let's move on. All right.
Exactly. Yeah. Nice to meet your partner. Okay. Let's get on to business.
Yeah. And, I have one of my favorite non-commissioned officers. He's in the Air Force. He's a Chief Master Sergeant now. He was on the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force's staff when I was the U.S. Forces Korea Senior Enlisted Leader. One of the best non-commissioned officers I've ever seen in my life. He is married to a male Chief Petty Officer he's not in the Navy anymore. He switched over to the Space Force. So he's now a Master Sergeant in the Space Force. Two phenomenal non-commissioned officers that happen to be married to each other. I could give a shit less that they're gay and they're married. All I know is these are two capable guys, to your point, that can get the job done and have proven that they can get the job done. Now where we run into issues, Will. So, when Trump 45 was a president, now we got Trump 47, the issue of transgenders serving in the military came up. And so Secretary Mattis convened a 10-week transgender review board, and myself, all of the service senior enlisted, and all the service vice chiefs of staff sat on this transgender review board for 10 weeks. And we interviewed doctors. We interviewed transgender serving troops. We interviewed behavioral health specialists. We talked with lawyers. We did a comprehensive review on this. And when we talk, in the end, what we were talking about is what we're talking about now is, are you lethal? Are you ready? Are you fit? Are you deployable? Can you serve? Yep. And when you talk about someone that has gender dysphoria, now not all trans people have gender dysphoria, but if you have gender dysphoria, it is akin and similar to anxiety and depression, which are disqualifying conditions in the military. Okay. So in the end, after 10 weeks, this is what we came up with. Now, the average non-deployable rate for someone going through transition as a transgender was about 250 days. The average. There were some that were 3 and 4 years non-deployable. And then the other thing is, when you talk about the hormone medications that someone has to take to change genders, they have to constantly be on this medication, and they have to constantly have medical care available to them. That's one of the things we learned. So when you think of this, think of large-scale combat, and if we're doing a movement to conduct on the Korean Peninsula or
Yeah.
in Eastern Europe against Russia, where we are constantly moving from phase line to phase line and objective to objective to continue to reach, in North Korea, be isolating Pyongyang and toppling the Kim regime and everything, that we don't have time to stop for someone that needs constant medical care and has to have their medications and things like that. And if they run out of their medications and they don't get it, then it could reverse what they're trying to do with their gender. So we took all of that into consideration for 10 weeks, and we went to Secretary Mattis, who was going to go to President Trump to give a recommendation. And we said, if you are a transgender service member and you don't have gender dysphoria, if you're a man and you consider yourself a woman and you dress up in women's clothes and stuff like that, you can serve, okay? But the issue came up with, using the opposite sex restroom and stuff like that. We said, well, that commanders would have to figure that out so that everyone is treated with dignity and respect, not just the transgender folks, but the folks that could be offended by, someone with, male body parts in a female shower and things like that.
Yeah.
So we came up with that recommendation, went to Secretary Mattis. He briefed the president. The president said, there's too much risk associated with it, so we're not doing it. So when you see the people that are saying that, that we're just being mean and we have something against transgenders, we did a comprehensive review in 2017, 2018, around there, to come up with a policy that made sense. Now, think of this. Will Yeski is a squad leader, and you've got a soldier in your squad that has been non-deployable for 400 days. And it can't go out and train with you. They're on a physical limiting profile that's basically breathe at their own pace, and they're transitioning genders. Do you, as a squad leader, rhetorical question, want to accept the risk of, instead of having a 9-man full squad going to Afghanistan, back to the Arghandab Valley with you, or are you okay with having 8 and 1 person on rear detachment that is doing these other things? Again, we kind of get mixed up with the discipline and accountability of having a trained, ready, lethal military formation, and the kind of concern of being over-empathetic and over-compassionate for someone within our formation. When I hear somebody say, well, transgenders ought to be able to serve openly, they don't understand the challenges that they go through and what it does to a military unit. I mean, when we did this research, I spoke to a commanding officer that had a transgender soldier on their books, and for 3 years, they had been non-deployable, getting their transition surgeries and everything, and they had never seen the soldier. They were just on the books because the soldier was at the hospital, not the military hospital, but they had to go to another hospital a little farther away, and so in the end, that's the concern with transgender serving.
I know that, one of the things I talked with somebody who was, when I was doing the research for one of my episodes, I actually talked with one of the, I think it was the first transgender person serving within an infantry capacity out in Colorado. But I had talked with my old platoon sergeant who's still in, and I was like, hey, do you run across people on Bragg? What's been your experience? And he's like, honestly, most of them are in support positions. I haven't had any issues with them, but I can understand from a combat side, that's frustrating as hell if you had somebody that's just non-deployable constantly.
What has bearing on me is that you are physically, mentally, and emotionally, and technically and tactically able to do your job as an infantryman, and you've proven it in combat. You've proven it, by earning the EIB and going to Ranger School and doing these other things. Okay, I'm good with that. But those individuals are few and far between.
Yeah,
Again, I'm not an anti-trans guy. I am a lethal, ready, fit, deployable force kind of guy.
Oh, that was one of the things that came up when I was asking some of the guys, like, hey, who should I be talking to about this particular book? When we were going into the combat situations and stuff, who should I be talking to endorse this thing? And everybody pointed it at you and was like, hey, if you're going at the top, you got to get John to sign this thing, man. So, no, I appreciate that. And I mean, that goes back to, I mean, you had joined up, you joined in 82, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that was, I was born in 82, so.
Oh, geez.
You were doing this stuff. You were jumping into, well, I don't know, when was Panama? Because that was, you ended up.
December 89.
So you were in with a tank unit first, right? If I remember right, you were Cav Scout.
Yeah, so I joined as a 19 Delta Cavalry Scout, which are basically extinct now. There are still some 19 Deltas running around out there, but in my beloved 82nd Airborne Division, they're getting rid of them all. But anyways, so I joined as a Cav Scout. My initial assignment was Fort Bliss, Texas. 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment at the time was there. I was in a heavy mech unit, and I joined the Army because I wanted to see people that were the sinewy, muscular, emotive, looking people that, were fit and all these other things. And I got a little disheartened with some of the non-commissioned officers I had. Remember, this was shortly after Vietnam. So I had a lot of NCOs that were directly over me. Not a lot. There were a few that were, clearly hadn't been on the scale or done PT lately. They were drinking on duty. They were doing it. Some of them even using drugs and everything. And I was like, man, I need to, this is not what I expected. Well, it wasn't long, and I came down on orders for Germany. So I ended up in the 3rd Armored Division in Germany from 84 to 87. And there was even more non-commissioned officers like that. But there was one NCO in particular, my squad leader, who was a post-Vietnam War guy, who was absolutely professional as hell. His name was Warren Hyman. And he taught me what it meant to be a good soldier, but more importantly, to be a good NCO. And then when it came time for me to re-enlist, I had seen a paratrooper when I was at Fort Bliss. They were doing some training, and our squadron was responsible for getting them range access. And so the captain was inside talking to my captain, and the staff sergeant was standing outside at a modified position of parade rest with his maroon beret on, big muscular guy and everything. And I asked him, I said, would you like to come in, And he goes, no. I said, oh, okay. He says, I don't cavort with legs.
That's about right.
Yeah. So I go inside and I ask my NCO, I said, hey, what's a leg? He said, that's what you are. I said, what's that mean? He says, somebody that doesn't jump out of airplanes. But I was so impressed with this guy and the confidence he had in, levying that insult on me. I was like, wow. And then, I volunteered to support the training that they were doing. So I was out there in a Jeep and watching them do the jump and watching them hit their assault objectives. And so while I was in Germany and it was time to re-enlist, I told my wife the only way I'm staying in is if I re-enlist for the 82nd Airborne Division.
There you go.
And after that, my career took off. The minute I got to Bragg, and 2 years after I got to Bragg, I ended up doing the combat jump into Panama for Operation Just Cause. A year later, was in combat again in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And it then came back, all the, special skills that I gained, Ranger School, Jump Master, Pathfinder, all of that stuff was a direct result of me being assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. And Will, you know the deal. All I had to do was this.
Yep.
I want to go to Ranger School. I want to go to Jump Master School. I want to go to Pathfinder School. I want to go to combat. All right. All you had to do is say, I'm willing to do all of this. And, it just set me on my career. And that was the springboard for me for my future success. And it was so humbling last year during All-American Week that I had the distinct honor of being inducted into the 82nd Airborne Division Hall of Fame. So one of the highest accolades anybody could receive from the most storied division. And so, that was what set my career in motion to where I had my ultimate success and reached the pinnacle of the enlisted ranks.
I saw that post on that, inducted to the Hall of Fame, and I was like, man, well earned though. That's the thing is, I mean, you have dedicated your life on that end of things. And the fact is that you're still taking care of troops now. You know, I know you had said before, you know, after I'm out of this position, I heard it in another interview during research, you know, after I'm out of this position, that's it. I won't be speaking to troops now. And it doesn't look like that's stopped.
No, you know, what's interesting is for the last, next month will be 5 years that I'm officially retired. I spend as much time talking to troops and veterans now and military families that I did when I was the SEAC.
Yeah.
And so I just cherish these opportunities. But this goes back to what we were talking about earlier when you saw the change in the military. You know, we were exiting out of Afghanistan, and, you know, we all know that, you know, the toughest part for a combat veteran is serving in Afghanistan. You know, think of this. We entrusted you to lead troops in one of the most dangerous areas in the world, the Arghandab Valley, in combat. We said, yeah, we trust you, ask you to do that. But you go back to Fort Bragg, North Carolina at that time, you didn't have enough rank to run a dang range. Okay. You know, I mean, I was like, okay, we will entrust you with these young privates and these young team leaders and everything and squad leaders out here in combat. But when we get you back to Fort Bragg, oh, you're too young, not enough rank to do those kind of things. It made absolutely no sense. And you mentioned earlier the difference. What I see now is basically, you know, there's a couple conflicts going on right now with Russia and Ukraine and what's going on in Israel. Hopefully both of those are going to come to the end here shortly. But we weren't directly involved in combat in those. We're given a lot of money, a lot of ammunition, and things like that. We had some special operators that were in both of those operations and everything, and support troops in areas nearby and everything. But we are basically a peacetime military right now. And when you look at the young team leaders and squad leaders, you know, I'm talking infantry kind of guys. I look back when I was a Stryker Brigade Sergeant Major during the surge in Iraq, and I look at my young team leaders and squad leaders from then that were these stoic, cold, professional killers, professionals. I mean, they didn't run around and yap and talk their mouth and everything because they had seen what death can do and what potentially losing your life can do. They had crossed over mentally and emotionally like you and like so many of us that I'm not coming home from this deployment.
Yeah.
But I'm going to make sure that I'm going to take as many of these bastards with me if I lose my life over there. And so we cross over mentally and emotionally that we're not coming home. Physically, we're fighting with everything we got to protect ourselves and our teammates on our left and right and our troops and everything. But mentally and emotionally, we prepared ourselves that, this is, you know, I'm glad I had time with my family and everything because I'll never see him again because I'm one IED away or one ambush away or one RPG away or one indirect fire attack away from, you know, being a beautiful human being to being a pile of flesh, camouflage material, and hair, you know?
Oh, I remember the exact moment. I mean, we were leaving the gate, but when I made that conscious decision in my head to where it was, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on right now and you're starting to get wrapped up in it. You need to stop and just accept it that you're already dead. You know, it's just, it hasn't caught up with you yet, but you can't effectively do your job if you're caught up in that. And it almost seemed like the people that were the most worried about that sort of thing and had that anxiety behind them, it was actually shackling them out there.
Yes.
You know, and I saw that, you know, and I was like, I had to make that decision for myself, but say, hey, that doesn't matter, man. Like, you just do the best job you possibly can until you can't. And that's all that matters. And it was super freeing in that way. But you're right. It's a definite, it's an advantage, but it's something that sets apart someone who's who's been to combat as opposed to not.
You know, for me personally, the minute I accepted that I had crossed over, I had this natural high about me that I wasn't worried about anything anymore. All I was worried about was making sure that myself and my soldiers were best prepared, and we kept that competitive edge over the threats that we were going to encounter out there. But I had crossed over thinking that I'm going to die over here, so I'm just going to get out and get after this mission. And to your point, those that were so worried about, you know, am I going to live? Am I going to die? And it caused them to be risk averse. And when you're risk averse, you relinquish competitive edges to the enemy. And then the chances of you truly getting killed go up considerably. So, and I heard you know, I've got a lot of people that are my mentors. And one guy that I really looked up to was a guy, he was retired U.S. SOCOM career Delta guy, Chris Ferris. And Ferris talked about in Somalia when they were being overwhelmed by thousands of Somali fighters, you know, Muhammad Farah Aidid's fighters, that he said, this is it. You know, I'm not getting out of this. I'm done. And he said this natural high came over him. The natural calm came over him. And he was able to weather this overwhelming superior firepower from the enemy and, you know, the wounding and killing of his comrades and everything. He was able to overcome that, and he was operating at warp speed, and he was in a band of excellence as a warfighter because he put all that behind him about whether I live or die. And think of Shugart and Gordon from, you know, since we're talking about that. Two guys that are in a helicopter and say, insert us down here on this helicopter, knowing it was going to be certain death. They went anyways. And so back to the original point I was talking about, when I look at these young team leaders and squad leaders that haven't been exposed to that combat like you and I have, I get concerned because if we're not doing simulated, realistic combat training at combat speed that causes discomfort, that causes leaders to have to make decisions that need to be sound and timely, and you don't have the right risk measured, you don't have all the resources you need and things like that, then we could be setting this force up for failure in large-scale combat. And so all of this stuff that we've been talking about, the online training, the everybody gets a trophy, hey, that doesn't mean shit when the flag comes up, and you and I both know that. So that's why I spend so much time with these troops. That's why I continue to talk to them. Sometimes, you know, I feel like I'm on another planet with a bullhorn yelling down to earth and what they should be doing to be ready to fight and win. But hopefully, you know, the direction our military is going now and our nation is going now, we are going to get back to that, building these stoic, cold, professional killers that are wearing our uniform.
I don't really see it as, you know, with a bullhorn. There's people out there listening, you know, and that is,
there is.
You know, it's, you might feel like you're the one, but now look at the tide, you know, on that end of things is when they're saying, hey, we need to get back as a lethal force. And, you know, they're saying that the recruiting is up in droves. I think the youth does recognize that the military holds, you know, it's a hard thing. It's kind of like a quest in a way. It's an adventure. You know, you're learning at the same time. You're learning especially within a war capacity. I mean, that it's just accelerated, you know, at an extreme there. You're experiencing life to where most people never get to experience something like that. So, I mean, they just don't get it. and you come back different from something like that. But I think in a way, you do have issues of PTSD and stuff that comes out of certain things, but I think it's really on how you look at it. Whether, you're broken down or whether you're being forged through that process. It's really, it's almost like the same thing as with, and I hate to equate it to this, but, when people are doing, you could actually say this through like psychedelic therapy, set and setting.
Yeah.
And it's all about how you're set going into that. If you know and you understand, hey, this is the risk that you're taking by joining up. But here's the reward, and you look at too, the rewards are huge, especially in the world that we're living in right now with college costs through the roof and things like that. The military it gives a real hand up to people who wouldn't have that possibility to open up to them otherwise.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. People serve for whatever reason they serve.
Yeah.
But there's a reason our military exists, and it's to fight and win our nation's war and defend our homeland, our freedom, and our way of life. And we can't ever, if someone joined to get college, to be able to set a foundation so they could springboard into another career and everything, that's all fine and dandy. But the people that wish to do this nation harm always will get a vote. And, we're an expeditionary military, and we're going to continue to be that way. So all it takes is one errant rocket from a Russian artillery tube that ends up in Poland and kills American soldiers. So all of a sudden, we may find ourselves in a huge war. Or the North Koreans coming across the 38th parallel and killing American troops in the joint security area, to all of a sudden the resumption of hostilities there. So, I applaud anybody that chooses to wear our uniform and chooses to serve, because they swear an oath, and that oath is to the Constitution, and they're going to defend it with their life if need be. And we can't forget that, even though some are going to join for other reasons that aren't so patriotic.
I think sometimes they don't think it through. They're just like, okay, some college and this and that. This is just the course that I've got to take instead of taking into account, like, hey, there is a risk here. Then there is, and evil does exist. But that's the reason why, guys raise their hand and they join up to serve, to take a stand against that sort of thing. Because I know you've seen it, I've seen it out there, is that bad people do bad things to people, but it takes others to do those bad things right back. But if you look at the way that we fight, or the restraint that we hold, there's no one else out there like that. Number one, I mean, and we didn't see that in Afghanistan or Iraq or anything anyway.
Yeah.
We'd either run between the fact of them blowing themselves up, or, tossing their weapons and running away. But yeah, that's total different side of things. But yeah, no, I know you know what I'm talking about. I mean, there's just some nasty people out there.
Yeah, and that's not going to change, And when you look at our national defense strategy, I know Secretary Hegseth will be developing a new national defense strategy off of President Trump's national security strategy. But our current one lists China as a pacing challenge. So across all elements of national power, we got to compete with China, and that's going to be a long-term power competition. We list Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and Iranian proxies in there that we will either, have to, through integrated deterrence, deny them any efforts to gain competitive advantages or do any malign activities. And certainly we've got to be able to respond to conflict and ultimately fight and win if it's one of those. And then, the terrorist organizations, like ISIS and Al Qaeda, and they may be a nascent threat, but they still wield power. And we saw that, during the holidays in New Orleans, when this guy that was inspired, a veteran no less, a veteran of the 82nd Airborne Division, that did this terrorist attack and everything. So to that end, our military has to be ready, has to be lethal, has to be fit, has to be deployable, and it has to be expeditionary. And we can't revert to isolationism and get everybody back to the United States. We got to stay in the 150, 160 countries that we're in right now around the world to assist our partners and allies to deter, but ultimately, if necessary, to kick the shit out of anybody that wants a shot at the title of the United States of America.
We actually saw that if you break it down into the simplest terms, the Arghandab River Valley.
Yeah.
That particular, if you stayed back in the FOB and you didn't put guys out there on patrol every day and have that presence out there, you were going to lose footholds left and right.
Absolutely.
And you can't. That is, that hard charging end of things, but it's what needs to be done. And that's also kind of falls under the whole ETOL Nation mentality as well.
It
if
does.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Say, why don't we go there? How did that start there?
So, I've always thought, just like you, that whether it was Just Cause, Desert Storm, the multiple tours in Iraqi freedom or Enduring Freedom that I served, I wanted to have the edge over my enemy. I wanted the enemy to be uncomfortable. I wanted to be in his security zone, in his support zone. I wanted to be where he's like, holy shit, I wanted to be like PFC Martin, 325th Glider Infantry Regiment in World War II. If you're looking for a place to hide, buddy, just get behind me because I'm the 82nd Airborne Division, and this is as far as the bastards are going. And so I always had this kind of attitude that, hey, we're going to take the fight to the enemy, and I feel sorry for them bastards because we are going to smoke them, And so I became the SEAC, and, you mentioned the bureaucracy that happens, and it's all over in the Pentagon. And there's too many people, senior flag and general officers and senior officers, even some senior enlisted, who forget where they come from the minute they get in that building. And it's almost like you're on this five-sided island, and you forget that you're responsible for the entire Department of Defense and every man or woman serving in the military and their families. And so I went to a meeting right when I became the SEAC. The chairman told me, I want you to go over to this deputy subcommittee meeting for the National Security Council. They're going to talk about ways that we're going to get after imposing costs on terrorists, specifically ISIS. And I said, okay, good. I'm ready to get after that. And so I went over there, and it was me and the J5, three-star general, that were over there. Everybody else were civilians. There might have been some vets in there, but this one lady, this one staffer gets up, and she says, well, if we want, to stop young men from joining ISIS, we need to give them jobs. And I'm like, this lady has no idea. Okay, I said, these guys, these people that join ISIS from countries like Belgium, from Germany, from the UK, and from the United States aren't doing this because of poverty. They're doing it out of being radicalized by this ideology.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, if we had continued to have this attitude here in the administration, we will never figure this out. And so that was the first thing that got me on this. I'm going to continue to focus on the warfighters and what we need to do to get after, to win this global war on terrorism and everything. And then Secretary Mattis came in. Mad Dog Mattis, Chaos, or whatever nickname you want to use for him. Now I had him as the SecDef, and I had General Fightin' Joe Dunford, Marine hero of 5th Marines in the invasion in Iraq and everything. I had these two senior elder statesman warfighters. And when Mattis said, we're not just going to defeat, we're going to annihilate enemies. So anyways, I'm in Syria with our most elite Army Special Operations Unit, the guys behind the fence there at Fort Bragg. And I'm out there for, the lasting defeat of Raqqa, which is the caliphate for ISIS in Syria.
Yep.
And I'm having a conversation with this sergeant major. His first name was George, who was a 20-year operator in that unit. I mean, he and I hit it off, even though, I'm a general purpose, Calf Scout, general combat kind of guy, and he's one of the most elite war fighters. He's got like 6 or 7 Purple Hearts, 2 or 3 Silver Stars and everything. But we hit it off on building professionalism in our non-commissioned officers and everything. And we kept talking about that they have to be the most lethal they can be. And that even means if they run out of ammunition with their rifles and everything, that they're going to use any means necessary to kill the enemy, whether that's an entrenching tool or whatever it is. So we kept bringing this entrenching tool up. So here I am on the roof of this building in Raqqa, watching our Syrian Democratic Forces, who are our partners, with our special operations advisors, going up against ISIS. And every time there'd be a lull in the fight, there would be a suicide vest bomber or a suicide vehicle-borne IED come out by ISIS. They were very, as you know, a very resilient enemy.
Yeah.
Finally, I just said something on that roof. I said, you know what? These assholes got 2 options. They can surrender or die. And so the unit sergeant major, Rob was his name, says, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, we're a peace-loving nation. If they surrender, we'll treat them humanely. We'll safeguard them to their detainee holding facility cell, give them 3 hots a cot, and due process in a court of law. But if they don't surrender, then we're going to kill them with extreme prejudice, whether that's dropping bombs on them, shooting them in the face, or if need be, beating them to death with our entrenching tools. And so he told me, put that in my update. He said, put that in my update to Dunford and Mattis. So I did. And Mattis wrote back to me that fits his narrative of we are going to annihilate any threat to the enemy. So for 6 months, I would say that wherever I was going to go, and the troops loved it. Guys like you, they loved it. The warfighters loved it. And there was never an issue with me saying this, And now I had some people come up to me and say, hey, I even had a Navy 3-star tell me, hey, you realize enlisted are meant to be seen and not heard, right? And I was like, Admiral, you need to get your ass out of my office so we can all be some fighting MFers in here tonight. And then another general officer came and said, hey, you need to walk this back. And I said, see that office down the hall that says Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? That one upstairs that says Secretary of Defense? They have no problem with what I said. So if you have a problem with it, go down and talk to them.
Keep it on the O side. Yeah.
So there were people that thought I was speaking out of turn and everything, but it was never an issue until I was back in Afghanistan, and I was with General Dunford on a USO tour, and we were up on stage before all the celebrities came out and entertained the troops, and we were talking, and I did what I always did. I gave that same speech.
Yeah.
Flo Groberg, Medal of Honor recipient, was up there with us, and Flo and I had entrenching tools in our hands. And I said it again, and the roof went off of the hangar there in Bagram. And afterwards, this little portly civilian guy with crew serve cameras around his neck came up to me. He was a Washington Post reporter and said, I can't believe you just called for the troops to go out and commit war crimes. Now, this gets after the disinformation that goes on with the media to this day, Will. And I told him, I said, look, I'm not telling them to go out and commit war crimes. We train soldiers, Marines, battlefield airmen, and special operators across our Army, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Navy forces to defeat enemy threats by any means necessary. We train that. And when we talk about winning, if all you got left is a shovel and the enemy is still coming after you, then you better beat him to death with the shovel if you don't want to die.
Exactly.
He said, well, I'm going public. He had a narrative. So this is Washington Post, which leans a little to the left.
Well, it also falls under he heard what he wanted to hear, as opposed to what the troops heard, because your troops understand there's ROE. Your troops understand that you're not asking them to go commit war crimes. You want a lethal force and you want an aggressive force. This is you have these guys out there fighting the war.
Yeah. And meanwhile, throughout this whole time, when I first said this and this thing went viral, and I mean, French media, Japanese media, Korean media all over the world picked it up. I'm signing entrenching tools. I'm up over 7,000 entrenching tools I've signed now. And it was never an issue till this media source picked it up. Yeah. And that's when we put that post on social media that went viral. And it was to combat this false narrative by this guy in the media. And that's when it went viral. But at the same time, this thing was going viral and the troops loved it. And, leaders were reaching out to me all over the world saying, thank you. The chairman and SecDef never had an issue. The president loved it. I got a call from the White House's photographer for the vice president, who used to be on the joint staff with us. And he said, everybody over here loves this, So it's never an issue, much like what's going on today in certain realms where people don't like decisions that are being made out there, and they are going to either go after malicious compliance and go in a direction that is counter, or they're just going to say, I'm not going to do it. And there were people that were attacking me professionally and personally because of that. But in the end, when it was all said and done, the troops loved it. And that's what Madison Dunford saw. And it was a way to inspire the troops, intimidate the enemy a little bit, because ISIS started talking smack about me on their French propaganda web page. So I started talking shit back to them, But in the end, think of the last 4 years, the previous administration. If any command sergeant major, SEAC, or anybody tried to say something like that, they would have been sent packing immediately. But because of President Trump, Secretary Madison, General Dunford, my three bosses, my chain of command, I got investigated, for using torturous language and hostile and toxic work environment because of talking about. And I thought to myself, did an ISIS fighter file this IG complaint against me?
It probably felt like that at the time.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But in the end, after all of this BS and I was reinstated, I knew I was right. And my bosses knew I was right. And the naysayers out there, the ones that were hoping I was going to go away, all of a sudden they came crawling back. Now, I forgave, but I never forgot. And I still haven't forgotten. Those people that looked to do me harm, when all I was trying to do was do the job of any leader, which is to inspire the troops and intimidate the enemy.
But you also stuck to your guns. You didn't back down. That's I would say the biggest takeaway right there is that, you took that hard right over the easy wrong. You didn't, I'm sure like either someone came to you and was like, hey, could you retract that or make a statement about that? Because I know how that works. And to stick to it and be like, I did nothing wrong here, and then to go through all of that and then get cleared, heck yeah, I must have felt good to get that final stamp there, but then also to not sacrifice yourself along the way.
There were people that came to me and said, hey, look, you've served for, at the time, over 36 years. You've been a sergeant major for 19 years. Just retire. And, you won't have to go through this. I said, so you're asking me to quit. And if I quit when I face adversity like this, I have just told every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guardsman, and Guardian that if it gets hard out there, just quit.
Yep.
I said, I'm not going to do it. I said, and I even told General Dunford and Secretary Mattis, there's only two ways this is going to end. You're either going to fire me and retire me, or you're going to put me back in the job and let me finish my last year plus as the SEAC. And in the end, it all worked out. And like I said, I kind of did the Conor McGregor walk back to my office after being suspended for 6 months, like, there you go, MFers. How about that, But I stayed a stoic. I kept it in me. And I went right back to what I was doing for the previous 2+ years, which is inspiring the troops and getting the pulse of the force for the chairman, SecDef, and administration, and delivering the why to the troops all over the world.
Well, on that regard right there, do you want to say something for someone who is, I guess, with someone like you who's had like this much of a career out there, it's almost hard to reach back and stuff, but can you reach back and give me something for someone who's just coming up in the military right now, especially with the turn of kind of that more aggressive posture again that we're going towards?
So my message to anybody serving out there now is you are the owner of your destiny. You are the owner of your career. And as I mentioned earlier, I set goals for myself, regularly and often on where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. I have a great wife that had spent this whole journey with me, and I kept her in the loop of everything I was doing. She was part of the family readiness group. She was part of the community. She did a lot of things. So when I say you have to own your career, set goals for yourself, and go out and get after them. And like I said before, all you have to do is do this to be successful. And then, I wasn't always at the cutting edge of being a lethal fit warrior. But I realized when I wasn't that I fixed myself and I made myself. And in the end, the more fit I was, the more ready I was, the more competent I was in my job, the more I was skilled, the more I enjoyed my time in uniform. The time I didn't enjoy it was when I was a fat ass in heavy mech land in Germany. And, I tried to cover up for my physical kind of inequities by being this book smart guy that could tell you what the size of the 3 American flags were, and shit like that, and could win Soldier of the Month boards. But that's not what people respect.
Yeah.
People respect someone that is Iron Mike, that leads by their example and says, follow me, and I'll show you what right looks like. And the more I did that, the happier I was, the better my family life was, the better my career was. So my point in all of this is to anybody out there, you control your career. It's your destiny, and you take it in a direction that you want to go to and make it work. I joined the military as a barely graduated high school, a half-assed athlete, and didn't have anything going with me. When I retired, I have a master's degree in business administration with a concentration in strategic leadership. I spent 20 years as a command sergeant major, retired as the SEAC, was able to fight for my country in 5 different combat tours, and I built something that now has carried over into civilian life, where I'm a small business owner, I'm a motivational speaker, I'm a leadership specialist, and I'm still able to do things that keep me goal-oriented, but more importantly, keeps my wife happy, now that we're on year 41 of marriage. And so that's my advice. Include your family and go out and get after your career. And don't be a victim, be a champion. Go out and win in everything you do.
There you go. That's solid right there. That is, and in speaking on that too, and going back, like the time where you were singing Germany, that is the foundation right there. And I'm sure you've noticed it along the way that you feel right physically, but that is the bare minimum, and building off of that, but you get that side straight first, especially in the military, because you have to be able to perform, on a whim there. And speaking of, small business, but you have 5 different, the last time I checked, I'm sure the books are different now, but it was something like you're consulting with 5 different major companies. You've got the stuff going on with the E-Tool Nation stuff. You got PME, which is your consulting. You wrote a book, Surrender or Die. Geez. You're just
I think there's two types of retirees and people that are post-military, and you know this.
Yep.
There are enablers and there's agitators.
Yeah.
You know, and the agitators are the ones that are pissed and moan because the Popeyes on base is costing more than the Popeyes off base, and they're harassing the senior mission or garrison sergeant major over that. I chose to be an enabler, and I focus on three things right now. Post-military life. One, it's to pay it forward to the men and women that are in uniform right now. What can I do through my consulting company, through my leadership stuff, for my unit business? What can I do to continue to bring inspiration to them to want to be the best that they can be in uniform, as well as, you know, their families? Second, I want to give back to my fellow veterans. What can I do to help them? And, you know, I'm a big athletics guy, so I sponsor 4 different veteran athletes, a couple of mixed martial artists, a female power lifter, and a bodybuilder, all that serve their country and in combat. And then the last thing is, how do I make life comfortable and build something for my grandchildren that my wife and I didn't have? So those are the 3 things I'm focused on, and they go in that order, and life is good right now, brother.
Yeah. What's some of the stuff in the way of resources? I know, are you still doing stuff with Hunter 7? I know there's a few of the other organizations and stuff that are giving back. Do you mind giving a shout out to some of them and what they're doing? Just because I know there's so many different things out there in the veteran space that sometimes it's hard to navigate, you know?
Yeah. So I'm on the board and I'm an advisor for Hunter 7 Foundation, which assists service members, one, identifying, you know, do they have cancer, but more importantly, assisting veterans that have cancer. I'm the national spokesperson for the Veterans of Foreign War, which has over 1 million members. I am on the Warrior Suicide Foundation that gets after combating veteran suicide. I work with the University of Health and Performance out of Bentonville, Arkansas, that runs courses that assist in transition, but more importantly, that delivers in assisting the veteran in regaining or retaining purpose in their life and their post-military activities. And I work with the U.S. Chamber's nonprofit Hiring Our Heroes, assisting transitioning service members, veterans, and military spouses to gain meaningful employment that will be commensurate with what they did in the military. And then I get after the lethality, supporting that, you know. I'm an ambassador for ESS Eyewear, the #1 ballistic eyewear that troops wear now. Beaver Fit USA, that provides material solutions to get after fitness and lethality, and things like that. And, you know, and then I support Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey, which is really the CEO of that company, Fawn Weaver. Whiskey aside, she is a true patriot of our nation, the most influential African-American businesswoman right now. She just won the Patriotism Award at the VFW annual convention. And I took her on a tour of 103 bases across the DOD in 46 days. 46 bases in 103 days for her to show her appreciation to the military. So that's what I kind of got going on right now. Maybe another book in the works about leadership and everything. We'll see how that goes. But life is good, brother. And again, the #1 thing, my main focus is, how do I assist this current force and how do I pay it back to our fellow veterans?
It seems to be that you're somebody who's always giving back, you know, and it's easy to see. I know our old commander used to have a speech or whatever, but one of the ones that I remember that stands out is the arrow of responsibility, is your leadership. You know, is it everything pointing up towards, hey, look at me, or is it the leadership enabling everybody underneath him? And it's pretty easy to see which side you are.
Yeah, you know, nothing makes me happier than seeing someone post-military that excels. I forgot to mention Downrange Supplements, owned by a young E5 that got out, had this dream of owning a supplement company. His name's Kevin Flack, and I'm an advisor for them. And here he is out here, spent, years in the 10th Mountain, served in Iraq twice, and in combat as an infantryman. And now here he is, small business owner, out crushing it now. And nothing makes me happier than seeing young NCOs that are out doing that in their post-military life.
It's always awesome to see those guys taking that hard charging mentality and that professionalism and creating something on the civilian side. Because I know that it seems to be the civilian side lacks some of that drive and stuff that the military or somebody with a military background can provide.
100%.
It's needed more than ever right now. And it's, aligning yourself with those people and being a mentor in there. That's awesome. John, I'll make sure that I get everything into the description bar and stuff too on there. So for anybody listening, I know don't worry about it. Just look at the description bar. I'll put everything in there that we talked about because it's lengthy on this one.
All right, brother. Well, Will, I appreciate what you do, man. Again, you wrote a great book, dude. You did a great service to, the troops that you serve with out there. And like I said in my testimonial, for anybody that is a leader in the United States military or thinking about, joining the military, they need to read Damn the Valley, Will Yeski's book, because it is a true testament to the warrior spirit and what actually happens at the ground level in combat. So God bless you, brother. And thanks for having me today, man.
Oh, no, John, thank you. Anytime, honestly, there's stuff in the future, reach out or something because, and I know that I'll talk to you sideline and stuff afterwards about it, but, I know that you definitely can point me in the direction of a few other people that are doing great things out there. Cause I know we have a lot of people that, we fought alongside and stuff during this to where they have that motivation and that drive and they're making a difference out there. And that ripple effect with the people around us, when you take that drive or you take that professionalism and move it forward into your life and go forward. And I think that veterans, we had that greatest generation thing from World War II in the past. I honestly think that the GWAT generation has that same capability there, as long as, and the new current generation is you gotta get out there, and you gotta be involved, that self-isolationism that happens sometimes with guys once they leave or they lose their way afterwards. Take that energy, find your purpose, like you were saying, and move forward in that with everything. But John, hey, thank you once again. Talking with SEAC, John Troxell. I appreciate it. And stay tuned. Just stay on the line with me because I'll talk to you afterwards. But for everybody else, appreciate it. And stay tuned for a word afterwards.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Veteran Success Story. If you enjoyed the episode or any of this resonated with you in any way, I'm going to put some stuff in the description to links to what retired SEAC John Troxell is doing now, such as some of his different efforts, eTool Nation, Downrange Supplements, and PME Hard Consulting. He also is working with a lot of other veterans organizations that deal with helping veterans out there. I mean, it's basically the job never stopped for him. I'm sure you guys heard in the episode is that he's continuing to do what he loves to do, which is take care of the soldiers that are out there doing the work. So I also have to say to you guys, as far as Veteran Success Story, like, follow, and subscribe. It goes a long way in me being able to keep the show free and keep the information flowing to you guys out there, which has been the mission of this whole project all along. So, like, follow, subscribe, goes a long way. Thank you very much. And, next week, we're going to have another episode coming to you guys. You guys are really going to like this one. Seriously, I'm not kidding. It's one I enjoyed just recording, and I kind of got lost in it afterwards. So be sure to tune in next week. And this, again, has been another episode of Veteran Success Story.